Hello, everybody, and my name is Mark Sage, the Executive Director of the AREA, the Augmented Reality Enterprise Alliance. And firstly, thank you, and I'm honoured and excited to be here talking to you about breaking the AR pilot purgatory and the work we've been doing to overcome the barriers to AR adoption. So what I'd like to do to start with is give you a quick introduction to the area so you can understand the kind of context and how I've been lucky enough to gain the insights and knowledge about the enterprise AR ecosystem, and particularly a focus on breaking the pilot purgatory. Some of you may already know about the area, but it's a global membership-funded not-for-profit alliance helping to accelerate the adoption of enterprise AR. And that's really important with any new technology coming into the enterprise space, being able to work together, to learn together, to help develop best practice. And the area was kind of created to do that. In terms of our kind of members, to give you an idea, they're in 3 different segments. They're the enterprises that are deploying the technology. And what I find always very interesting about that is that regardless of the industry, a lot of them are delivering the same kind of use cases or solving similar business problems. And we'll come talk a lot more about that when we talk about overcoming pilot purgatory. We have a bigger group of the hardware and software providers within AR. And, my thanks to PTC, who have been a long sponsor member, key contributor, and delivering a lot of their thought leadership in conjunction with the area and its members. And then real quick, the third group, kind of a group of non-commercial organizations, government agencies, research institutes, universities, and standards organization, and bringing all of these different players together, again, to develop those partnerships, to learn from each other and develop best practice is really helping us driving the ecosystem forward. And then finally, what does the area do? Well, it's about these 4, what we call our strategic pillars. It's about delivering thought leadership. It's about the content that a lot of you listening today would be really interested in. So the business decision leaders, I believe, are interested in 4 things. They want to understand what problems can be solved using AR. I'm going to come back to this time and time again, the return on investment. How much does this technology cost? But more importantly, how much are I going to make or save by deploying it? Another area is around networking. I've mentioned a number of times bringing the ecosystem together to share those experiences and learn from each other. The educate side, that's all about closing the AR skills gap. What we're really trying to do here is work with educational organizations to help them define what AR courses would look like, to offer guest lecturing, outplacements, and setting challenges. And then finally, and where we're going to be kind of the crunch of this conversation ongoing, is about reducing barriers to AR adoption. What we've done within the area is created a number of committees, which are basically monthly meetings where the members come together to talk, to develop best practice, and to look at some of the challenges and the barriers that we have, and coming up with the content and best practice to overcome them. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about next, is come from those committees and sharing experiences. So let's go on to a little bit about breaking the pilot purgatory. It's a lovely phrase. And I remember when I first started this role about 5 years ago, one of the board members, we were talking about the kind of issues of companies continuing in this pilot purgatory stage or in pilot mode. And he said one of the things that he'd learned very early on was to work with enterprises and say to them, plan for full deployment, but deliver a prototype or an ongoing kind of prototype. And that's always stuck with me, because one of the things you need to do to overcome this pilot purgatory is at the very start, plan for success. And what does that really mean? Well, it means bringing the organization together and creating those cross-functional teams as early as you possibly can to educate them, to make sure they're involved in all of the steps, and to identify who the key decision makers and the stakeholders. So that kind of stuck with me, and it's actually beginning to boil down into these 6 different steps that I'd like to talk with you today. Some of these you might say, well, Mark, that's like asking your mum to suck eggs, they're obvious. But I have to say, over my years of doing this job, I've had a number of phone calls from various people saying, hey, Mark, we've just bought a AR headset, or we've just deployed an AR kind of software platform. What do we do now? And it's like, well, actually, it's all about solving real business problems. So that's the kind of first part. The second part, it's about the business justification, the business case, the ROI. I'll mention that, some of the tools we've developed and some of the best practice. To me, AI, the successful AI deployment and deployment across the organization is a human, it's a change management, it's a person thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of working with the stakeholders and also the actual users of the technology. Talked about the cross-functional teams, so build in and work with the safety and security and other teams from the very start. And then a few of the kind of process things about prototyping and promoting the technology and never ever stop, or don't stop, as I've said there. So what I'd like to do now, if it's okay, is go into each one of these in a little bit more detail and give you some of the insights and some of what I call the war stories, some of the enterprises that have successfully deployed the technology and what they've kind of taught me and learned from the rest of the area members. So I mentioned this before about solving real business problems. I know it's obvious, but it's really critical. And the more work you can do up front about thinking about the business problem, and I'm going to be talking about a process we've kind of put together within the area to do that, the more important it is. I know a lot of you will know Michael Campbell from PTC. Him and I have been talking about, do you actually need AR? Some business problems don't always need AR. There's a tendency to bring technology in, but if you're really clear on what the problem is, you know when AR can really benefit you. Return on investment, I'm going to keep going on about this, but the earlier you can think about it, the earlier you can measure, the continued measurement of the process and the improvements that you're making really makes the deployment of the technology so much better and simpler. And the other thing we do, if you do the good job of defining the business problems up front, that really helps prioritize the features. When budget is tough, or you're looking at making some quick wins, prioritizing the right features to deliver first is important, and you can do that by really solving a business problem. And then finally, when you're actually doing this task, please define it in a clear business language. So it means that other parts of the organization, other business units or other supporting organizations can really understand what you're trying to do. And I talked about the kind of process. This is something we put together a while ago in the area. And again, it's not rocket science, but it's making sure you go through a number of really important steps to make sure you've clearly defined the problem and you have a clear use case. So one of the things, gain an overview of the use case. I mentioned before, some of the use cases that we've been defining in the area are generic across different organizations and different industries, I should say. So it's a great opportunity to look at other industries and what they're doing, what you can learn from them, which is the applicable industries. The third one is think about where the use case takes place, the settings. Is it in a manufacturing plant? Is it partly outside or field service working? Things like that. That will have potential implications on your hardware and software solution. But now we get to the crutch of the problem, 4, 5, and 6. It's about really solving problems. So can you clearly articulate and make a clear problem statement? That really helps because your focus is always on solving that problem. Can you, or I'm sure you can, define the current process, but that's important to do at the very start. There's a number of reasons for that, but being able to measure that process is critical, and we'll come back to that in a second. Then what can you do to AR enable that process? Have you seen other people doing it, looking at case studies, speaking to providers, being able to understand how you can improve that problem statement through AR is critical. That, with all that content, gives you an opportunity to look at the benefits. What I find speaking to lots of people around the globe is that they have a bunch of benefits that they wanted. They often get those, but there are a whole bunch of other benefits that they didn't realize or were kind of happy to receive by doing an AR implementation. You need to look at your digital assets. Are they in the right format? Are they available? Are they tucked away in other business systems? The environment, the kind of physical environment, do you have the right infrastructure? The connectivity, is it bright? Is it dark? Is it noisy? And then we go back to the personas. Are going to catch up with that again, about the actual workers and then finally the stakeholders. So whilst again, I reiterate, this is not rocket science, it's important you go through this kind of process so you really understand what you're trying to do and how you can deliver it. So once you've kind of worked on that business problem, I'd just like to mention the ROI part now. The area has actually created an ROI calculator. We have a research capability. We asked the members what they'd like to research, and the second research project we did was around creating an ROI calculator. It's critical, and we've actually made this available for everybody because we need more data points in the industry. But I guess the insight I'd like to make about the ROI calculator or ROI in general is that, to really help with that deployment question, if you can measure before, during your AR kind of prototyping phase and afterwards, you have a rich amount of information which really shows the improvements. And that's the thing that often the stakeholders will buy into. It's showing bottom line savings that you're making through your AR project. And remember, most of the enterprise AR projects are about saving money, which is often a more difficult sell than making money. Just on that part, the thing we've delivered and found has been very interesting is that ROI can be quite difficult to do, and especially if the company doesn't have the kind of assets or the infrastructure ready for AR, that digital transformation that gets lots of bandwidth at the moment. So that can be an investment. It may not be, depending where the journey is of your organization. But if that is the case and there is a digital transformation that needs to be done, then my recommendation is you have a project for that, which can enable all sorts of different projects within your organization, but don't try and wrap all of that into your AR ROI calculation, because it may not work. But this kind of paper, which is free for everybody, talks about some of the other challenges of implementing ROI as we've moved forward in agile development process and things like that. But it's a very useful paper to review. Going on to the next step, it's all about managing people. I mentioned before, and I have a particular interest in this because I do believe that AR is a change management. You are changing people's hearts and minds and changing processes. So this is a real nice, simple diagram showing that there are two things to consider. There's the stakeholders, but what I'd like to focus on a little bit more is the kind of user level, the people actually using AR. And one of the reasons why I see pilots staying into pilots is that the users are either not bought into it, or their concerns or requirements haven't been listened to. It's basically just been a deployment of the technology and not incorporating the actual user's feedback. So this is real critical. We've done some research on this within the area. And I'll just give you one little war story about this. One of the area members who have been a long-term user of AR and shown lots of benefits, but when they first implemented the technology, they understood about the change management. So they found the kind of one of the longest serving technophobe shipyard workers that they could find, and invited him to come on, happened to be him, invited him to come along and work on this AR project. And then this person kind of changed his whole attitude and understanding of the technology when it solved problems for him. The company listened to his concerns, developed a solution based on that, and then he became the biggest advocate. He really did promote the technology and brought other people on board. So again, a kind of a nice story, but it does really show that involving your users that early stage will certainly make sure that the workers don't throw away the tools or don't use it, which is an often reason why projects stay in pilot purgatory. And just to summarize, you see these different bullet points: educate, understand, involve, and respect your workers are some good kind of guidelines and things to think about in terms of really making sure that you achieve the change management program well. Just to give you an idea of some of the committee work I mentioned before, but safety and security, another reason why we see projects staying in the pilot phase and not being fully deployed is because of these different business units. They're not trying to be awkward, but if they're not involved or they don't have an understanding of what's going on, the natural reaction is to say, no, it's not happening. So crucially important in those very first stages, involve the team, keep them up to date, understand their kind of concerns, feedback, and work with them right the way through. And these kind of couple of infographics have been our way from the area just to help explain and keep people engaged. And again, we've gone a little bit further in the safety committee, where we've created a kind of safety playbook, we call it. It's a template. It's the kind of thing that a safety professional can use to really understand the AR project. As you can see, there's some kind of simple risk assessment. There's been a lot of work recently about cleaning and disinfecting devices, which can be a big concern for especially as we go back from the COVID pandemic and other parts as well. So again, the takeout from this is involve them early, involve them right the way through, and listen to them and understand what their needs and challenges are. So when the company are actually developing the AR project, they've got the different component people involved and they're really kind of focusing on it. I found, and there's a number of area members that tell the story that it's still quite difficult to deploy the technology. There were still concerns. There's the red tape, and it's just, you know, challenging to deploy the technology. So what a few of them done, and this has really helped them, is promoted the technology and demonstrated the technology as much as they possibly can. You know, target those senior executives. Can you target your customers and the wider supply chain? And can you create an area that people can come and try this technology out? So another war story from one of the area members, they say we're doing pretty well in deploying the technology, but would like to have moved quicker. They had an opportunity to present to a VP of one of the business units. They did a great job. The VP was straight away on the phone to the CTO saying, hey, look, you've really got to come and see this. The CTO came and seen it. Next thing you know, he's on the phone to CEO. Suddenly, kind of any challenges around deployment had almost gone from a stakeholder perspective. The budget, the resources, and the willingness to kind of deliver the project really grew very quickly. So again, anything you can do, think of it as a promotional activity, but create those processes for feedback so people can actually make comments. This company went on to the next stage where they actually now have a suggestion kind of process for anything to do, improvements on the current products, but also for new AR projects. And that's really helped them, you know, deliver AR throughout the organization in different, you know, from assisted to augmented reality. And, you know, means that their team is good size and delivering real benefit for the organization. And the other thing I suggest is you can promote even wider to the AR ecosystem. Yeah, the area would be great, but there's many opportunities to talk about, you know, the projects, the ROI that you're getting. So kind of you business leaders out there that are deploying AR, you know, reach out to you and say, hey, please come and tell us the stories, because the ecosystem is keen to learn and help understand how you can successfully deploy this technology. And kind of final of my my step-by-step bit is don't stop. Now, I know that sounds a little bit obvious, but you know, that continual engagement of that cross-functional team. You know, I often think that I understand when a company has made it is when the AR team actually becomes part of the central IT team. That's often where you've made it. It's a shared resource that can go across a number of different business units and things like that. So whilst it's a little bit strange, but a simple goal could be that AR becomes part of that central IT team. You know, are you actually deploying or are you continuing prototype? To me, if you can continue adding features, you'll continue the prototype process, as long as they're measured against ROI. Going back to my part where you measure ROI throughout all the processes, make it part of your project, make it part of the way you work is to measure ROI. That secures budget for new features, but also for new projects. And you might be able to do the same process with new use cases. And we see that often. The cost of ownership question is coming up more and more. You know, companies have deployed the technology on one use case. Can they reuse that technology, the software platforms, the hardware, and solve other problems? Hence, really increasing their cost of ownership and return on investment. And again, continue to promote. So I'm coming towards the end. One of the final kind of models I'd like to just present you is trying to bring all of this stuff together. Okay, we see when AR becomes part of a company's kind of strategy and strategy development, you know you're into the deployment part, but that's a really important step. Build and communicate and work with those interdisciplinary teams. That really helps the project go from pilot into prototype. Manage and educate the employees. I've mentioned that on a number of times. Work with and promote with the stakeholders. And you know, that continual prototyping is another bit. And underlying theme to all of this, you can evaluate the performance and evaluate the ROI on your project, then, hopefully you won't be in pilot for too long. You'll be in deployment mode very quickly. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much. I hope that was useful. I'd like to invite Michael Campbell, if he's about. I'd love to have a little chat with you and get your feedback and thoughts and questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark, for sharing the content, and hello to the audience. It's a pleasure to have the chance to join this session. And in addition to thanking you for participating today, I also want to thank you for the partnership that we've had between PTC and the area. It's been incredibly valuable. We really appreciate the forum that the area provides, and have gotten a lot of value out of it. And hopefully you'd say we've contributed as well. So there were some interesting questions that came out, and one of them ties to a point that I wanted to make, which is that I love the story about the experienced shipyard worker, right? Getting involved, and really using the end users as a means, engagement with the end users to manage the change. I had a question which was really around other lessons learned that you have seen regarding how to win the hearts and minds. And somebody in the audience asked for your view on gamification to promote AR implementation on the factory floor or in the industrial enterprise more broadly. How do you think about that?
And it's kind of difficult. It's very relevant often to the industry, to the use case, and the kind of challenge that you're trying to do. I think there's definitely a place for that. I've seen some companies do it quite successfully. If it goes too much, I think people start to think it's more of a game. But I've certainly, and simple things, when we're talking to some use cases around training or skills development, a little bit more fun than just you've passed that kind of test, collecting points or whatever it is a simple gamification. So I think, and again, if we go back to, if that's what the end users want and you speak to them and discuss it with them, then yes, I'm all for it. I just don't think you do gamification for the sake of gamification.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a delicate balance there. What I like about that idea personally, my experience has been that there is, AR is such a personal experience, and that there is tremendous value from letting people experience it themselves. Right? It's hard for us to show videos and talk about concepts, but when somebody puts on a piece of digital eyewear or holds up a tablet and sort of sees the magic happen and really understands what's happening there, that goes a long way. And if there are more creative or, let's say, lighter touch ways to do that via gamification or others, I think that's I definitely think that's an interesting idea. Another question maybe. So this is great content, and I love the playbook here. Sort of the 6 recommended steps, to really make progress and avoid pilot purgatory and scale. From your perspective, where's the biggest challenge? What's the biggest pitfall? Where do companies sort of slip off track most commonly from your perspective?
It's a great question, and something which is really actually difficult to answer. And that's why I kind of like the question, because it really depends on how you develop the project from the start. If you do a great start, get everybody involved, everybody's signed up, then you have the opportunity. I think one of the key challenges I see when they do the definition, they don't often think about the infrastructure. So, do I have the content available? Do I have the connectivity available? What can end up then is you do something which is a little bit standalone, a little bit bespoke, and then there's a sudden bunch of other costs that you have to add to it to make that more of a fully deployed, connecting into core systems and stuff like that. So, but to be honest, Mike, I find across the board there are different companies, different industries, different use cases get caught in different parts. So it's more, the question is, can you really work through this process correctly and do all of the steps? That's going to give you a much better chance of successfully deploying the technology.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I think that the variability in use cases is a key thing to consider here, and it changes the likelihood of pitfalls. Maybe just to key off one of your comments there and tie it to a question from the audience related back to data and systems and content. Patrick in the audience is asking, is there a minimum level of PLM adoption that's required to be able to successfully implement AR? How do you think about that one?
I think it's a good question. I go back to the statement I made earlier that if you want to prototype something quickly, you do have the opportunity of taking that data out and having a standalone system, but that's not going to get you to deployment. That's going to promote it. So, yeah, I personally think in the companies that have been successful have planned for that PLL integration and implementation. Suddenly, then it becomes a core part of the business systems and the way that the business organizes itself or works. So, my kind of recommendation is, if the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can use that PLM data. It may be that you take a thin slither, a simple use case, potentially on just one product line or whatever the kind of process is, but try and integrate as soon as you can, because that opens up one of the key deployment challenges, which is integration. If you could do that at early stage, you're on the right track.
Yeah, or at least recognize it and begin working on it in parallel. But it ties back to your first slide, right? Plan for full deployment, and then prototype and incrementally work your way there. So yeah, I would agree. Great answer. Another question from Chris in the audience, and it's a question about what he or she says is, what are the thoughts on adding failure vectors when adding a new layer of IoT or AR? Things like battery life, device issues, Wi-Fi connection, device compatibility in the future. And I think the summary point here is, will I need a dedicated IT team for AR to sort of mitigate those failure vectors? What are you seeing amongst the membership on that point?
That's quite an involved and complex question. I think technology choices, both from a hardware and software perspective, can be a little bit difficult. I think, are they talking about, Mike, I don't know if you can help me a little bit more flavor on it, is, does the IT team need to manage these devices, or are we talking about the kind of the failure of content as such?
Yeah, I think it's really more about the former, right? I mean, what kind of an IT lift is required here in order to really scale AR in the enterprise?
Yeah, and we've spoken about this before. You can start very quickly and very easily using kind of tablets. I think people have got AR. Well, it's a wearable device. That doesn't need to be the case. And if you're showing some real benefit there, we know there's some challenges, predominantly on the hardware side. I think the software side, the technology is moving so fast. It's excellent. It's really kind of helping companies. The hardware is a little bit more challenging. I think moving into the IT team is a great way to really show that the AR is part of the organization. But there are things you can do. What I'm hesitant against, and my apologies if there's kind of innovation people out there, but having just something which people kind of play around with, I don't think really helps. There's always going to be those challenges of how you move that into a deployment or into the proper business unit. So. Not sure I'm answering the question completely, but
I think you make a very good point there, right? I mean, the challenge that I've personally seen from sort of the putting AR in the innovation group, right? Go see what you can do with it, is you basically walk by I don't know, probably 4 or 5 of the 6 points you made, right? We lose the ability to focus on real problems. We lose the ability to really quantify and frankly be held accountable to an ROI. So I would also caution against that. We've probably just got 1 minute left, Mark. So maybe maybe one last question, and that is, how can the audience learn more about the work that the area does and potentially get involved? Where would you send them? Maybe the social tags on the screen here is the best place.
Yeah, absolutely. Just come on to thearea.org, or you can send me an email. We do lots on social media. It's really an opportunity to be part of the ecosystem, to learn from each other, and to help drive it forward. I'm very keen to get those kind of thought leaders out there, because there's a lot more we can do to help everybody successfully deploy the technology, and keen to push that as much as we can.
Yeah, great. And that I think that there were a couple of questions. People really liked your content. People were asking you to go back to slides and requesting access to the slides. I assume that if they reach out to you, either email or Twitter, maybe you could share some of the content if folks are interested.
I'd love to. All of that content's freely available on the website, and happy to share any of it or have a chat to anybody wherever I can help.
Great. Well, Mark, thanks a lot for participating today. And again, thanks for the great partnership, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks so much.